Alright, welcome. We're now going to focus on the next of our concepts, which is the use of lists, which is another form of collection which we're going to be looking to use to store information. Good thing about lists, and the reason why I prefer using them more, is they're a little bit more flexible. They can be dynamically resized, so if you're not sure how many items that you want to have plugged in to your collection, that you can simply go through, use the likes of a list, and it will expand as required. So let's go right ahead and make a program that's going to maybe store a list of student names. So the key thing that we want to try and do here is use the key term list, and you'll notice here that there's a bunch that'll pop up. The one that we're after is this one with the little angle brackets here to start with, and we're going to do an angle, and it will then pop up with the description of the data type that is needed here. So inside the angle brackets we will say that it is a list of strings that is going to be worked with. Notice that it has no S, but it is a list of string being plugged in. The next bit of syntax, or the way that we write things, needs to be the name that we'll give it. So I'm going to call it here student names, using nice camel case notation, which is our convention. Then we're going to go through and say that we're going to define a new list. And same story, we do a little bit of a double up here, which is a list of strings, and then finally we will end off with an semicolon, but before doing that we put opening and closing brackets or parentheses. So it's a little bit of a tricky one to try and remember. Basically here we're using the list class, we're telling it to go through, and in this list class we're going to be defining a bunch of strings that are going to be stored in this list. This is the name that we're going to be using it. We're telling it that this is going to be a new list that's going to be created, and it's again just confirming the fact that it is going to be the likes of a string being used. So that's pretty much how we will declare our list, similar to like a variable, and now we're able to start using it. So again, I find this a little bit easier to try and look at working with. If I was to go through and use this list and push the name of it in there, and then push the dot property, similar to working with an array, you'll notice that there's all these bunch of different methods and things that we can do with it, and one of the items that will appear at the very very top there is the likes of add. So if we're wanting to go through and add someone's name in here, we can easily go through and do that, and then copy and pasting code down would probably be the fastest way. We'll add several items into the likes of this, and then we can just change some of these things in here to different names. Okay, so now that we've got those names plugged in and loaded, similar to what we did in the past, we could go through and we could show you how we can sort them. So this one here again I find a little bit easier to remember. I'm going to put the name of the list, and I'll use the sort method to go through and do that. So it's a built-in thing. So when it goes to display this, this will now be sorted in ascending order, and the same thing as we did before. If we're wanting to go through and output them, we can do that through the likes of a loop. So we could use either a for loop or a for each loop. If we're wanting to go through and access one individual index, then we can also go through and do that, similar to working with an array. So let's go through that and do this to start with. Now, just like an array, a list here is going to be indicated with being zero based. So the very first item that is going to be stored will be stored in index 0. Then moving on down this, as you can see, we've got them being plugged into index 2, index 3, index 4, and then index 5. If we're not careful, again, we can go out of bounds and generate some errors, and that's one of the things I might do for us now, okay, is go through and show you how we can look at outputting some of these items. Okay, so in here I'm going to use the contents of this list, and then in here, in the past when we were dealing with arrays, we did the square brackets to show the item that we'd like to pop in at. Okay, so what we're wanting to try and do here is perhaps show that we can go through and indicate the fact that we'd like to output this item. And let's go through and do a console.readline, and at index 0 we've got the name of Bob, So we'd be expecting the name Bob to be appearing through the likes of things. It's not appearing because of the fact that I've got the sort line. Okay, so let's just make this a bit easier to see. Comment that out. Forgot that one. Okay, so there it is. So at index number 0, we're storing the name Bob. If, however, we did have the sort command up and running, then what you would have seen from before is the fact that Bex, because of the way it's spelled, will be coming up before the name Bob. Okay, so that's how we can access that particular item. There are other ways in which we can do it, by going through here and looking at particular elements, etc. But that way that I just showed you is probably the easiest way in my view. Alright, so let's go through and try and output the contents of this as well. We'll use the likes of a for loop to start with, and then we'll go through and use the same method as we just said before. Okay, so there's our student name, and then accessing each of these, we're going to replace the likes of our hard-coded literal value for the likes of our variable, which is going to obviously go through. Now we need to know how large this item is going to be, so one of the ways in which we can do that, because it is dynamic, is we can go through and find the count of it, similar to what we did before, and this is going to go through and be smart enough to know now when things should finish. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 names being stored in index 0s to 5. Okay, so if we go through and run this, there's our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice how they're showing in ascending sorted order now. Okay, so that's how we can do it through the likes of a for loop. As I mentioned before, probably my preference for doing things is the likes of a for each loop. It's going to be smart enough now to know that when we try and output things in here, slightly shorter code that you can see, block this out here, bring the read line underneath, run this code here, and then you'll notice there same results that are occurring. Okay, so that's how we can output the likes of some kind of list. Now, other things that we often want to do is maybe load up, I don't know, all of the numbers that we did before that were considered even between the likes of, say, 0 and 100. And if we were to try and use that concept, we could define another list of integers, and I'm going to call it here odd numbers. Do the same item as before, saying that it's a new list, and in this case, new list of ints, and then we're dealing with a new value. I might just look at blocking this comment, commenting that out, so that we can look at skipping it when we try and run it, and we'll chop this out as well. Okay, so rather than us manually adding these details in here, this is where the likes of loops can really help us. So we know how we can work with a for loop, and if we're wanting to go through and show all of the odd numbers between, say, 0 and 100, we can go through and do that quite easily. Start this off as 1, then we can go through, increment these up by the likes of I plus equals 2. So we know that that's going to be jumping up in set intervals of 2, and then simply we're going to go through and add to our odd numbers list what I is going to be equal to. There you go, finish that off. And you need to spell that correctly as well. Okay, so using that method, let's going to quickly go through and look at spelling things out. Next thing is I'm going to do a for each loop and then simply output the contents of this. And rather than working with the student names, we'll work with odd numbers. And I'm going to output the likes of my console, and I'll use the item once more. Okay, the old spelling and typing's gone as the night's gone on. Alright, so there you go. We've now got the ability to read in all these odd numbers. It's stored each of those within the likes of this this list, and now I can output them. Okay, so seeing what that might look like, provided I've got my console.readline, you'll notice now that all the numbers are being outputted as you'd expect. we just simply change the way in which this is written from a right line to a right, might be a little bit more obvious with a little bit of concatenation on there at the end as well. Okay, so that's how we can simply go through and output things like that. Now, similar to what we dealt with before, if we're wanting to work out what the average and totals of these things are, we can go through and put, well, odd numbers. Let's work out the dot max of things. The dot min of things as well is also available. All of those things that I showed you before with the likes of arrays are also available to us. Okay, so that's how we can work with the likes of lists. Okay, so we define that we're wanting to deal with a list. In the angle brackets, we declare the data type of what we're expecting. We're then wanting to go through, give the variable a name, and then we just finish off the statement with these rounded parentheses as well after saying that we're wanting to begin a new list. So that's how you can look at initializing a list and declaring it, and then how we can fill the likes of a list up. Alright, so that pretty much brings us to an end the likes of collections, which is the use of arrays and lists. We'll be doing lots of examples to try and help consolidate your learning in these tutorials, and we'll come back and start dealing with the last of our concepts, which are the use of methods, which is the last of our level 2 ideas.